My name is Michael Waldo, and my presentation is on the OODA loop and the honeymoon effect. The original presentation was called Inside the OODA Loop. It was presented by Sandy Clark, Matt Blaze, Matt Elmore, and Dave Nelson Fisher at ShmooCon 2012. This presentation will focus on the honeymoon effect and how the researchers used information from the field of military strategy as well as evolutionary biology to understand the honeymoon effect and what its implications are as far as a new security hypothesis. Right now, exploitation is getting harder, but despite of this, defenders are still losing in spite of the advances in software quality. These quotes are from Symantec's Current Trends and Analysis report in 2012. According to that report, the total number of vulnerabilities is on the rise, more vendors are being affected, more sources reporting vulnerabilities, there's a rise of vulnerabilities for hire. The severity of vulnerabilities is getting worse, and there's also a rise in designer vulnerabilities. This leads us to the fact that in order to get ahead of the attackers, we need to change what we're doing. We need to change the rules of the game. And in researching this, the researchers found something that they call the honeymoon effect. This first graph is from Brooks's Mythical Man Month that was published in 1975. It shows the inner arrival rate of bugs in software. It tells you that early on in the software life cycle, the inner arrival rate of bugs is very fast, and as the software gets fixed, the software supposedly gets better. In other words, it improves with age, and this model has been surprisingly stable over time. The same experiments that were used to create this graph have been repeated several times since then, and they have come up with very similar results. So this graph has been surprisingly stable even though it was originally made in 1975. The researchers then wanted to find out if vulnerabilities in software behave the same way as bugs do. They took a look at the rate in which exploitable vulnerabilities were reported in roughly the 40 most popular software packages, and they found that the arrival rate of vulnerabilities actually goes up over time. During this time, bugs are getting fixed and the software is supposedly getting better. And what they found was what they called the honeymoon effect. That there was a very long time between release and the discovery of the first vulnerability, slightly less time between the first and second vulnerability, and so on, which suggests sort of a learning curve for the attackers. This suggests that developers can release really bad software, and until the attacker's learning curve catches up with the new software, the software won't be attacked. What this suggests is that in order to create more secure code, every time that we release a new version of code, we should delete all of the old code and start over. This would theoretically reset the honeymoon period. And this method has obvious drawbacks, but in practice it might lead to better software. In order to better understand the honeymoon effect, the researchers wanted to look at other areas that were interested in both building good defenses and factoring in the attackers in those defenses. The best two examples that were found were in the fields of military strategy and evolutionary biology. The piece of military strategy that was relevant to the honeymoon effect was found to be the OODA loop. The OODA loop was created by Air Force pilot John Boyd. OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. The OODA loop describes the decision-making process involved with human conflict. People often look at the OODA loop and think that if they speed up the process, that they can get further and further ahead of the opponent. That is true, but it also involves making the right decision in the right moment. It has a lot to do with responsiveness. The OODA loop illustrates the decision-making process between two intelligent beings trying to gain the upper hand on each other through deception and speeding up of their own processes. Being on the defensive side of security means that we cannot technically win. The best we can possibly do is stalemate. Being on the defensive side, I mean, we never have the initiative and are always reacting to the threats after they manifest. We don't have the ability to preemptively attack potential threats, and we have to wait for them to occur. Once an attack occurs, we can't counterattack in any useful way, so our only option is to mitigate damage and minimize risk. Our current defensive strategy consists of mostly static defenses. We dig our trench, put up our walls, and hope nobody breaches it. This strategy doesn't work. It's been demonstrated time and time again throughout history, and it's a purely defensive strategy. And history has proven that defensive strategies don't work. And this brings us to what the presenter called an aggressive defense. He advocated knowing what assets within your network were most vulnerable and to prioritize your defenses around them. He also advocated to integrate deception and psychological operations wherever you're able. This is where the OODA loop comes into play. If you're able to influence the attacker's decision-making process, you may be able to gain the upper hand in defending your network. He also advocated defending in depth, which means don't put all your defenses in one spot. Advocated spreading them out if that's at all possible. They also advocated limiting the attack surface area as much as possible. Now we come to where the original presenters came to the comparison between evolutionary biology and cybersecurity. Now, when comparing those two fields, it's very easy to compare cybersecurity to the predator versus prey models in evolutionary biology. But when the researchers looked at this comparison, the data did not match up. What they found was that the cybersecurity world more closely resembles the parasite host model more than the predator versus prey model. Now, in the evolutionary biology world, there are two competing hypotheses about the parasite host model. The one that matters to the honeymoon effect and demonstrates the OODA loop is called the Red Queen hypothesis. The Red Queen hypothesis states that for an evolutionary system, continuing development is needed just in order to maintain its fitness relative to the systems with which it is co-evolving. When they were measuring the honeymoon effect, what they were measuring was how fast the attackers adapted to defenders' new code and changes in that code. In other words, they were measuring how long it took the attackers to go through their OODA loop. This is an example of adaptation in response to evolutionary pressures. When the researchers looked at the defender side, the defenders followed the mythical man-month model and did not adapt well in response to attacks. This is because our defenses are based on flawed models such as static defenses and the patch and pray method. These methods are proven not to work. The defenders need to be able to adapt as fast as the attackers are adapting. This information leaves us with some questions as to how we apply this information in the security world. Some of the questions that the presenters posed is how do we test this, and what data and what experiments should we be running in order to test this. Another question is how do we reset the honeymoon effect and still reuse code. Another question is how do we manipulate our opponent's state of mind to prevent an attack. These are all questions that they posed at the end of the presentation for the audience. These are questions that do need to be answered by people in the field. Thank you. This is a link to the original research for the honeymoon effect, as well as a link to the YouTube video for the original presentation.